Good morning and a warm welcome to the first session of this workshop. In this session, we'll be talking about the deep neural networks, the kind of introduction to the deep neural networks, and how the journey happened from the human learning to the deep learning, and the very basics of the deep neural networks we'll try to cover in this lecture. So this lecture will be kind of, so with the objective of bringing all the participants to the same floor. So kind of among the audience, there might be people who do not have any idea of the deep neural network at all. Or otherwise, some of you might be knowing very well about the deep neural networks or the machine learning. So my objective is, so to bring all of you to the same level. So with giving the intuition of what the machine learning is and where the deep neural networks fit in. So all those things we'll be discussing in this 1.5 hour session. Yeah, this is the outline of my presentation. So I'll briefly talk about where the deep learning fit in. So among the artificial intelligence and machine learning, then we'll talk about the structure of the human brain, then the very first neurons, McCulloch-Pitts neurons and the perceptron. Then we'll see about the perceptron learning, then the multi-layer perceptron, then how the training happens in case of the multi-layer perceptron, then the deep neural networks and how what are the hyperparameters and how do we train the deep neural networks. So all these details we'll be discussing in this session. Few of you might be knowing all these details. So for those who know the details, this will be kind of, a review. So for those who do not have any idea, so this session will give you a detailed idea of how the deep neural networks work. So please try to focus on the things and try to understand as much as you can. Yeah. So let's dive into the session. So let me clarify what is the difference between artificial intelligence, machine learning and the deep learning. So what is the basic difference? So let me give the clarity of that. So what artificial intelligence is? So basically intelligence means the capacity to learn and solve the problems, right? So we humans are able to learn the things and we are able to solve the things. So who can solve the problems? So they are, so basically known as the intelligent people. So can we simulate the machines also to do such kind of intelligence? So can we simulate the machines also similar to the human intelligence? So like, can we give kind of the ability to solve problems to the machines, the ability to act rationally, that means according to the situation, then the ability to act like humans. So if we can give such, abilities to the machines, so then we call that as a artificial intelligence. So that's what artificial intelligence is. So if we can give the intelligence, human intelligence to the machines, then that is the artificial intelligence. And this artificial intelligence basically can be achieved in different ways. So maybe one is using the logic and the rule-based approach, and the other one is using the machine learning-based approach, or you can even call it as a pattern-based approach. So in case of the logic and the rule-based approach, so you are using the set of rules, right? To design a game, you are formulating or listing out all the rules and then you are achieving the task. But the problem with this rule-based approach is exhaustively listing out all the rules is impossible. And also if there is any change in the rule, then again you need to rewrite the entire code. The entire implementation of the design has to be changed. So that's what the problem with the logic and the rule-based approaches. So that is overcome by using the machine learning approaches. So what this machine learning is? So we humans learn by experience, right? So can we give such kind of learning to the machines also? So can we make the machines to learn by experience? So basically machine learning refers to the ability of the computers to learn without being explicitly giving any programming. So you are not saying like, you are not writing any kind of algorithm. So if this happens, do this, if this is what happens, then do this. You are not programming the machine, but how the machines can learn the things. So machines you are training, so by experience, just like how we humans learn by experience. So here in case of the machine learning, the machines are also aimed at learning by experience. So that's what machine learning is. So if you compare traditional learning and the machine learning, say for example, any kind of algorithm you are implementing. So in the traditional programming approach, so if you consider this as an algorithm or the program, then the program takes the input, so like the input, right? The data as the input, and it gives the output. So that is how you are solving the problems in the traditional programming approach. But in case of the machine learning, so you are not writing any program basically. So like you are not telling the machine how to solve it. So what are the rules to be followed to solve the problem? You are not informing the machine. So instead what we do is, so we give some kind of input and the sample output also. And by looking at this input and the corresponding outputs, the machine itself will be learning the programs. So the output of the machine learning algorithm is a program. So it is a kind of, so it learns the mapping of the input data with the outputs. So those kind of mappings between the, the correspondings between the input and the output is learned by the machines. So that's what basically is a machine learning algorithm is. I didn't mean that we are not writing any code in case of the machine learning. Of course, we are writing the code for the machine learning algorithms. But what we are writing is, so how the machines can learn the associations between the input and the output, we are not teaching them. So the associations between the input and the output, or the patterns between the input and output, so that is learned by the algorithms itself. That we are not programming. So that's the difference between the traditional programming and the machine learning, right? And to for machine learning, we have, so in the traditional approaches, we have a huge number of algorithms that have been developed. So like for the classification, for regression, for clustering, right from the logistic regression to the support vector machines, we have numerous ways to achieve this machine learning, right? And amongst them, so we have one interesting algorithm, that is a neural network algorithms. So we are interested in this neural network algorithms. So the objective of this, the talk is about the deep neural networks. So there is something special about this neural network architectures. So what is that? We'll try to learn about this. So the artificial neural networks. So what are these artificial neural networks? So these are inspired by the structure of course, by the structure of the human brain. And these are basically introduced to imitate, so how we humans think and how we humans learn. So based on the experience, we are learning, we humans are learning, right? And we are also thinking based on our past experiences. And can we simulate such kind of human brain working? So in the machines also. With that intentions, so these artificial neural networks were introduced. Of course, they were introduced long back itself, and they were successful in 1970s and all. But so there were some limitations for this artificial neural networks. So the reason was, at that time, the computational resources were very, very limited. So because of that limitation, and also the data availability at that time was very, very limited. And because of many of the limitations, so the complexity of then we rethink into the new artificial neural networks. So with that objective, the deep neural networks were introduced. So deep neural networks were basically a powerful class of the machine learning algorithms. You can think of the deep neural networks as a modern incarnation of the artificial neural networks. So of course, the same old artificial neural networks we are using, but so some add-ons we are using with the artificial neural networks. And what helped us to achieve, this kind of success with the deep neural networks? So all those things, so we'll see and we'll try to understand. So these deep neural networks are basically, they can learn the hierarchical representations from the input data that we are providing to the algorithms. So that's the major advantage of this deep neural networks. And they are exceptionally effective at learning the patterns from the input. So because of the depth in the neural network, so they can learn the hierarchy of the representations, and these representations will be useful to achieve the final task. And because of these, exceptional learning ability of the deep neural networks, so they contributed to achieve so humongous, success for solving many real world problems. So what are the kind of problems they could solve? So in the real-time world is like they can almost all the problems, you know, you can solve using these deep neural networks. Not only solving the problems, so to mere human performance, we are able to achieve only because of the deep neural networks. So this deep learning applications are like you can consider in the social network analysis you can see, the autonomous driving you can see. So even the natural language processing for the sentiment classification, for the entity extraction, for the translation, for all these things you can see, like machine translation. So like translating one language to the other language. So for such activities, you know, deep neural networks helped us a lot to reach the human performance levels. So not only solving the problems, of course, machine learning helped us to do that, but these deep neural networks helped us to achieve the mere human performance. You know, in some applications, they even overtaken the performance of the humans. So like the AlphaGo. So which is solving the problem, like it's a gaming application, right? So who a machine could beat, the AlphaGo could beat the champion of the Go game. So that is how these deep learning applications could solve many of the real world applications with human level performance. So what made it to reach this kind of performance? So we'll see shortly. So let me clarify so where does artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning are, so how they are related. So if you can see, artificial intelligence is kind of, you know, so solving incorporating the human intelligence in machines is known as artificial intelligence, and which can be achieved in multiple forms. And one class of achieving this artificial intelligence is machine learning. So machine learning algorithms you can use to achieve artificial intelligence. And again, you know, these machine learning algorithms, this is not the traditional way of learning the learning the things. It's kind of without being explicitly programming the things itself, the machines can learn the things. So that's what the objective, with that objective only these machine learning algorithms are introduced. Then what these deep learning algorithms are. So the deep learning algorithms have the ability, you know, to discover the patterns, the hidden patterns that are underlying in the data. So that's where the deep learning sits in. So an exceptional class of the machine learning algorithms are the deep neural network algorithms. So now what is the reason behind the success of these deep neural networks? So I would say there are three you know, major contributors are, these are the three. The data that is available, the hardware that is available nowadays, and the software tools available in this era. So if you look at the data, the large volumes of data that is available, so is, you know, the major contribution for the success of the deep neural networks. So if you look at the ImageNet data sets or Wikipedia or even the social networking sites, so that is a major contribution for the success of the deep neural networks. And another reason for its success is the hardware capability. So in the olden days, though neural networks were introduced, so they could not take off because of the computational limitations. So but with the introduction of the graphical processing units and the tensor processing units, the GPUs and TPUs, so we could massively parallelize the computations. So this is another contribution for the success of the deep neural networks. And the other thing is the software tools that are available, like Keras, TensorFlow, PyTorch. So because of these tools, even the main programmers are also able to code the things and are able to achieve realize the problem solutions. So this is another reason for the success of the deep neural networks. So basically the data available, the hardware capabilities that are available, and then the software tools. So these three are the major reasons behind the success of the deep learning. So then deep learning, of course, it's taking off. If you compare the machine learning with deep learning, so how it is taking off with respect to the data is, if you consider any machine learning application, when you have small amounts of data, of course, the machine learning also, you know, fails. The machine learning algorithms also fails. But when you add more and more data to the algorithms as input, then of course, because it's all, you know, the training of the algorithms. So as you add more and more amounts of data, then you can see some kind of improvement in your algorithms, right? But that is only up to certain extent. So after reaching a point, you know, even if you increase amount of data, you cannot see any improvement in the performance of the machine learning algorithms. But that is overcome by the deep learning algorithms. So if you observe, no, as you increase the amount of data, the performance of the deep learning algorithms you can expect to be increased. So that is where the deep learning took off. Yeah. Then basically, what is the difference between the machine learning and the deep learning? So from the perspective of the training, so how they are different. So if you look at the machine learning perspective, so the input is the data. We all know about that, right? And we extract the features. So kind of for the machine learning algorithms like SVM or the logistic regression or the GMM. So what we do, we extract some features using an external algorithm, right? So like the GIST extractor or the FOG or even the LBP features we extract. So remember we are using some kind of additional algorithm for extracting the features. And so after getting the features from the data, so we train the models, right? The model is trained, and once the model converges, then so we apply it on the test data and we get the predictions. So that is how the typical machine learning algorithm works. But how the machine learning algorithms works. So like if you look at the machine learning, so the input, so there is a feature extraction algorithm, and the class, like you have a machine learning model. So let it be for classification or regression or for clustering, whatever. So then we are getting the outputs, right? The predictions from the model. When it comes to the deep learning, so there is no feature extraction step if you closely look into it. So like you are providing the input, so the model itself will do the extraction along with the required task. And then so you are getting the predictions from the model. So now this feature extraction is completely replaced, right? So instead of having two different algorithms, you can have a single model itself. And when you are applying the traditional like handcrafted feature extraction algorithms, so you need to set the parameters, and you don't know which parameters gives you the best features. And these machine learning algorithms, their success is greatly dependent on the features you are providing. And if you give the best features, your machine learning algorithm will give you the better performance. But we do not have any idea of which features are better, right? So that is the problem that the machine learning algorithms were facing. But that is not there in case of the deep learning. So that's another advantage of using the deep learning algorithms. So, you don't have to do any, the human intervention is not required in between. So you don't need to do the feature extraction phase. The feature extraction, so is merged together with your job. So now your job is, it's very easy. Yeah. So what this deep neural networks does is, so how they became so successful. So what is the major reason for that is, so they are kind of course, here we are saying that it's doing the feature extraction also. So how it does? So when you provide the input, what it does is at multiple levels, it can learn the required patterns from the data. So if you give some kind of images, then at the initial layers of the neural network, then it might be learning something kind of, the lines and the edges kind of data from the input images. So maybe in the later layers, then the features related to the individual objects from the input data. Then at the later layers, so maybe the holistic picture of the input data, and that is required for your objective. So whatever the features that are required for your objective task, so such features only will be available at the final layers. So that is how the deep neural networks will be learning the patterns from the underlying patterns from your data at multiple levels. So that is how they are kind of, hierarchical representations are retrieved from the input data. So that is the reason why, so we prefer deep learning over the other traditional machine learning approaches. Yeah. So of course there are now, I think this motivation is sufficient why we should study deep neural networks and why we should move on to the deep learning instead of the machine learning. And these deep neural networks, of course, they are motivated from the human brain itself. So now let's have a look at the structure of the human brain. So if you look at the human brain, so you can consider it as a highly complex nonlinear, and you can even consider it as a parallel computer. So if someone asks you, so which is the highly complex nonlinear and the parallel computer in the world, so you can immediately say the human brain, right? Yeah, so which is many times faster than the fastest digital computers that are existing in today's era. So that is what the speciality of the human brain is, and it is having the capability of recognizing the patterns. It has the perception capabilities, even it can do the motor control. And how it is able to do all these things? The reason behind the processing is the neurons. These are the basic processing elements, the information processing elements in the human brain are the neurons. And if all these neurons are connected together, you can call it as a neural, like the human brain, right? Human brain contains almost 10 power 11 number of 10 power 11 number of neurons in the human brain on an average. And if you look at the single neuron structure, so you can see this is the structure of the single neuron in your brain, and you have almost 10 power 11 such neurons in the human brain. And this neuron is having, single neuron is having the processing capability. And how it processes the information is, if you consider this as a cell body, this is the nucleus in the neuron, and these neurons are connected to the other neurons in the brain, right? And when something happens, so the information will be passed on to the neurons. And maybe this picture will give you the idea. Say, for example, we are watching the video. So when we watch the video, then the organs are react, with the ears we listen, and with the eyes we watch, right? When we are watching the television, then the neurons connected to these two organs, so they will immediately react and they will transmit the information to the connected neurons. And so the effectors will be reacting, so as a reaction to what we are watching in the television. So that is how we cry or we laugh or we react depending on the situation, right? So of course, even though there are 10 power 11 neurons, all the neurons will not react altogether. So if you observe, so these neurons that are marked in yellow, so only these neurons are processing the information in the situation, right? Depending on the situation, so the corresponding neurons will be processing the information and transmitting the information. And if you observe this single neuron, so the dendrites are the connectors with the other neurons. So these are the connectors with the other neurons, and these dendrites will be carrying information from the other neurons. So then all the information that is transferred from the other neurons through these dendrites, so they will be processed by this neuron at the nucleus, and then that information will be carried out by this axon. So axon is the connecting element. So this axon will be transmitting that information to the other neurons. So here you can see the axon terminals, and so they will carry the information to the other neurons. So that is how the individual neuron, single neuron, this is all about the single neuron. So this is how the single neuron works in our human brain. So when a stimulus happens, then so the receptors receive the information, then the neural network, so the neurons connected to that receptors will act and the effectors will respond to the situation. So that is how we react to the situation. So we humans react. And so from this motivation only, these deep neural networks were introduced. Then how the journey from this human learning to deep learning took place, so that we'll have a look at this now. So if you consider the history of the deep neural networks or the deep learning, so you can consider in the year 1940s, the first neuron was introduced by the two famous scientists, the McCulloch and Pitts. And the neuron was called as a MP neuron. So by the names of the scientists, it was named, but there was some limitations for that neuron. So we will discuss all these details. Then in the year 1958, Rosenblatt introduced perceptron. So then there was also some limitations. Then perceptron was criticized in the year 1969 as it could not, be applied for the non-linear applications. Then in the year 1974, the backpropagation algorithm was introduced, and so with that introduction, so there was a lot of success for the artificial neural networks. But the problem was there was an awkward silence between 1974 and 1998 for the neural networks. So then came into the picture the support vector machines. So compared to the artificial neural networks in the year 1974, so the support vector machines were much successful in the year 1995. Then with the introduction of the convolutional neural networks for the digit recognition in the year 1998, so again, so we could see success of the artificial neural networks. And of course, so these were the modern incarnation of the artificial neural networks what were introduced in the year 1974 or before. And in the year 2006, so Boltzmann machines were introduced, and you can see from that period onwards, you can see it's a spring for the deep neural network community, and this is still going on with the introduction of the Google Brains project in the year 2012. So everybody, the entire world and the industry recognized the importance of the deep neural networks for the success of many real world problems. And in the year 2012, AlexNet was introduced, which was trained on the ImageNet dataset, so which is having millions of data. And from there onwards, so we know how successful these deep neural networks are, and we can expect this success for the next 20-30 years probably. And what is the first artificial neuron that was introduced? So let's have a look at that. The first artificial neuron that was introduced was the McCulloch-Pitts neuron. So you can call it as a MP neuron, which is actually a simplified version of the human neuron. And this neuron was introduced by McCulloch, so a neuroscientist, and the Pitts, who is a logician. In the year 1948, they introduced this MP neuron, and how it works is this neuron contains, so two parts. So one is the aggregation function and the other one is a threshold function. So G is aggregation and F is the threshold logic. So these are the two parts in the MP neuron, and it takes the inputs, and the limitation of this MP neuron is you can only pass, if you observe, only the Boolean values. So these neurons cannot process the non-Boolean information. The real values cannot be passed as input to your MP neuron, and the output will be produced. And what is the processing that happens here is, so G aggregates all the inputs. So like you can represent the G of X. So where X is the input, so which is of n-dimensional in nature, so then G of X can be represented as summation over I equal to 1 to n xi. So this is what G of X is, and depending on the threshold you are setting, the theta you can consider it as a threshold, and depending on the threshold we are setting, so if G of X is greater than or equal to theta, then so your output you can set to the your input can be classified as a positive class or otherwise to the negative class. So that is how you can classify the data using the McCulloch-Pitts neuron. And this logic we are using is known as a threshold logic, as we are using the theta here. But the problem here is, you can implement all the Boolean functions like and, or, not, all these Boolean functions which are linear in nature, all those can be implemented. So you can look at this. So if you change the theta value 3, then this network works as, this neuron works as an N function. And if you use a threshold as 1, then it works as an R function. And similarly, when you are using x1 and or x2, so if you want to implement this logic, then the threshold value should be 1. The problem is with different applications, the threshold you are using is different. And how to figure out the threshold here? So that is challenging here in this MP neuron. And the other thing is, so you can pass only the input data as Boolean values. For the real values, these MP neurons cannot represent the real data. So that is a problem with the MP neuron. So just for the conclusion, using the single McCulloch-Pitts neuron, so you can represent any Boolean function which are linearly separable. And the Boolean function also, the inputs must be of binary in nature. Only the binary values can be passed as input to these Boolean functions. So then what are the limitations of the MP neuron? And the limitations are, so you can handle only the Boolean data. So these MP neurons cannot handle the non-Boolean inputs. And you need to set, as I already explained, no? So the threshold you are setting here, it is 3, here it is 1, here it is 1. So how do we like arrive at this threshold? So that's a major, challenge in this MP neuron. So you need to manually set the threshold, how to arrive at those values. So that is a problematic thing. And all the inputs you are passing to the neuron are treated uniformly. They are not given, any weightage for a specific input. Say, for example, for the student mark prediction or the pass-fail prediction, so in that case, the number of hours the student is studying, that parameter should be given highest weightage, right? But in case of the MP neuron, there is no such, flexibility of giving weightage to specific inputs. Then these neurons are only capable of separating the linearly separable data. So see here, so I have the data which is linearly separable. Only such kind of data can be represented using this MP neuron. So overcoming the problems that are identified in the MP neuron, so Rosenblatt came up with a neuron known as a perceptron. So this perceptron was introduced, so addressing the challenges of the McCulloch-Betz neuron. And the differences between the MP neuron and the perceptron are, so of course you can pass the real values as input to your perceptron, and so it's possible to give some weightage to the inputs. So in addition to the inputs, so you have the weights associated with every input. So here if you observe, X1 is associated with W1, X2 is associated with W2. So whereas in case of the MP neuron, there are no weights associated with the input values. So each input is weighted with some weights, right? And you are getting the prediction value. So now you need not to limit your inputs to the Boolean values. The binary inputs need not to be necessarily. So you can pass on the real values as input to your neuron perceptron. Then how it works. So how the perceptron works. So let's have a look at that. So now your neuron, again here in this case also the neuron contains two portions. So one is aggregation logic and the threshold logic, right? So then you can represent it as, so your value is, aggregation value is, so Wi into Xi, where the I value is over 1 to n. So you have n different inputs to your neuron. So your aggregation value is represented as summation over I equal to 1 to n Wi Xi, right? And when this value, the aggregation value is greater than or equal to certain threshold, then you are classifying into positive class, otherwise to the negative class. So this is how the perceptron can work, and this can be rewritten like when you introduce one more input to your neuron, so which is a dummy value actually. So it's not your input X0, which is always a 1, which is always set to the constant 1, and we are attaching this as input, and this is associated with a weight, basically the bias value. So when we add on these two values, then you can rewrite this equation for more flexibility actually. So we are writing the above equation, so like this. So like now also the summation is over I equal to 1 to n, so Wi Xi of course. So now so now this theta value actually is moved to the left side. So this theta value when it's moved to the left side, then your threshold will become 0. So now if you observe, no, so in the MP neuron, the problem is with the threshold. You need to set different thresholds for different problems. But now we overcome that, right? So now always the threshold is a 0 value because the threshold is moved to the left hand side. So that is how we have rewritten, and now we introduce this new W0 parameter, the bias value, and also the X0. So now after introducing this, the more accepted convention is like you can rewrite it like this. So instead of writing Wi Xi minus theta, so this theta can be removed. Then this can be rewritten as I equal to 0 to n Wi Xi. And of course the threshold again is a 0. So now you need not to have any specific threshold you are going to learn, right? So the threshold is also made a part of your weight parameter, right? That will also be learned by your network. So that is the flexibility that we are getting using the perceptron now. So now when you represent, instead of writing it as scalar values, if you represent W and X as vector forms, then you can write it the logic as, so if Wx, so when W and X both are vectors, then if this Wx, the dot product between these two vectors is greater than or equal to 0, then you are classifying the input to one class, otherwise to the other class. So that's how this perceptron works. Then coming to the perceptron learning algorithm, how this perceptron, like, so if you observe now, you should get these W's. So in the previous case, in the MP neuron, you don't have the weights, right? So in that case, you need not to learn any weight. But in the case of the perceptron, we have the weights in the network. Then how these weights are learned? So you're not providing them to you as input to your model. Only the inputs are provided. Then how these weights are learned? So that we need to understand. So the perceptron learning algorithm helps us to understand that. So let's assume that P are the set of examples that are belonging to the positive class and N are the set of examples that are belonging to the negative class. So the examples with labeled 1 and labeled 0. And of course, initially we assign some random values to all the weights in the network. So with that W0 to Wn, all the weights are initialized. Randomly you are initializing. Then, so you are iterating this process as long as you reach the convergence. So what we are doing is you are picking one of the example from your input data. So both from the positive and the negative classes you can take one example randomly and you are feeding it as input to your model. And if your prediction is a negative class and if the example is actually belonging to the positive class, in that case you can understand there is an error, right? So if you observe the example you are picking is X and the X is actually belonging to the positive class. But the prediction you are making, what is this WX? It's actually the prediction. On giving this X as input to this neuron, then it's predicting it as a negative class. Then there is a mismatch, right? The crown truth is positive, but the prediction is negative. Then you need to update your parameters. So how you are going to update your parameters? So because of the weights only, so it's predicted and the misclassification happened, right? So now we need to update the weights. So the weights are updated using the logic W equal to W plus X, right? And there is another problem, like in the another case also you can have a mismatch. So your actual input is belonging to the negative class and your prediction value is actually positive. So then also there is a misclassification. So in this case also you need to update your weights. So now how we are going to update your weights? So you need to have actually the negative class, right? But positive. So you are getting a bigger value. So you need to reduce the weights. So now we are updating the weights by reducing them. So W equal to W minus X. And you are iterating this over as long as all the examples are classified correctly or until you reach the convergence. So here actually we are using two kinds of updates. So when your example is belonging to the ground truth, like positive, ground truth is positive and prediction is negative, then W equal to W plus X. And in the other case it is W equal to W minus X. So can we make the update as a single update rule? So with that objective, so we are writing the updation of the weights at the kth iteration as, so Wk equal to Wk plus, so this is the weight in the previous level. So Wk minus 1 plus the delta Wk, the change in the weights. So with this update rule, so you can update your weights in the perceptron. So this is the perceptron learning algorithm. And if you look at the training loop, so these are the inputs. Of course, this is the bias. So typically you can call it as X0. So these are the weights in your network. So then this is the aggregation logic and this is the threshold function. And finally prediction you are getting, so we call it as Y0. So it could be either minus 1 or 1 because we are only using the threshold logic instead of the sigmoid or what or whatever. So then there could be a chance of getting an error. So what is the error? Here the prediction is Y hat. So our actual ground truth is the Y. So then the error we can compute it by taking the difference between the ground truth and the predicted value, right? This is what the error is. And we need to update the weights based on the error we are getting from the model, right? So now your updation of the weight parameters, how it should be. So your weights are updated in the k plus 1th iteration. So is equal to Wk plus delta Wk. So how this delta Wk can be computed? So depending on the error only, we are computing this weights, right? And the error into xk, your input example, the kth example you are feeding in. And so eta is the learning parameter. So with this update rule, we are going to update the weights. So that is how the perceptron training happens in iteration. Here if you observe the perceptron, in case of the perceptron, the weights are updated. So based on the error you are getting at the output layer, right? And the error is computed from the, the label you are predicting from the model. So either it is a 1 or 0, right? The predicted value by the model is a 1 or 0. And the ground truth is also a 1 or 0. And if you compute the error, no, so it will be a 0 or 1. Maximum it will be a 1. And when you take a square of it, then it will be a 1 or 0, right? The problem with the perceptron rule is, so when you are updating the weights in the network, so you are not informing how much you need to update the weights. You are just informing you just need to update the weights. That's all. So to overcome that, the ADA line neuron was introduced. It's actually ADA line stands for the adaptive linear unit. So it's a variation of the perceptron where the error is back propagated. So before finding the labels itself. So here if you observe, no, you are getting the aggregation here and the same value. So here it's a linear activation only. So here this activation function is just a dummy value and you are just using the linear activation value, and the value you are passing back when you are updating the weights in the network. So then what happens with this ADA line unit is, here instead of propagating the class labels, you are propagating the probability values while updating the weights. So with this what happens is, so you are actually informing the model, like instead of just saying update the weights, so you are saying what was wrong and what was correct and how much it was right and how much it was wrong also you are informing to the model. So because of this nature, so ADA line, so which is adaptive linear unit, is more powerful when compared to the perceptron. So of course both have the aggregation and the threshold logic. So both have the activation functions also. They use the threshold logic only. But the thing is, when you update the weights, here the labels are used. In case of the ADA line, only the probability values are used. So that's the difference between ADA line and the perceptron. So this is how you are, making the learning faster. Yeah. So then whether the perceptron converges or not. So most of you might be having the doubt, right? So of course the perceptron converges, but under certain conditions. So when the perceptron converges is when you are feeding the data which is linearly separable and the data is belonging to only two classes. So if your data is coming from two classes and if it is linearly separable, then only the perceptron converges, and that too without any error the perceptron converges. That means you are getting these weights in the network such that all the examples you passed in the training, during the training, are classified without any error. So such that you are finding the weights. So that's what the perceptron convergence theorem guarantees. And if you want to have a look at the proof, then you can go through the pages 82 to 83 of Simon Haken book of chapter 1. Okay, so that gives you the detailed proof. Now, I hope all of you are following. So because sound understanding of this perceptron rule is very, very important to understand the forthcoming lectures. So if there are no doubts so far, so I can proceed to the next. Yeah, of course, this perceptron, you can use a perceptron to implement, all the linearly separable applications. Like you can implement an AND gate, an OR gate, a NOT gate. So any gate which can be, or any application which can be linearly separable. So if you observe in case of the AND gate, so if you plot the data, so 0, 0, so here it is 0, 0, it's 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, right? And the classification of the data, you can separate them using a line, right? It's linearly separable. And the same with the OR gate also. So whenever the data is linearly separable, that is, the data can be separated using a line in two-dimensional. When it goes to the higher dimensions, you can separate the data using the hyperplane. So such data can be represented using the perceptron without any error. So as long as the data is coming from two different classes. And here you can see, so with these weights 2 and 2, and if it is an AND gate, you can implement them. And similarly, the OR gate also can be implemented with the same weights, right? With a different bias. So that's how you can implement any linearly separable function using the perceptron. But the limitation of the perceptron is the non-linearly separable data. Simple XOR also cannot be implemented using the perceptron. So that's the limitation, major limitation of the perceptron. So what are the non-linearly separable functions? The functions where you need to have the non-linearly separable boundary. If you observe, how do you separate these two classes? The XR is visualized here, that's all. So here, if you observe, no, so these two are belonging to the class 1 and these two examples are belonging to the class 0. And when you draw the boundary, so it's no more linear, right? So you cannot, separate these two classes using a linear boundary. So here you can observe. So then such kind of data cannot be represented using the perceptron. And consider this data. So here, so you have the data, so which is non-linearly separable, and this data which is of course the same kind of XR, only I'm representing in different ways. So either you can use this kind of boundary or this kind of boundary or even this kind of boundary. But so the linear boundary is no more sufficient to represent this kind of data. So this is where the perceptron fails. So the limitation of the perceptron is, so it cannot, it cannot represent the data which is not linearly separable. So that is where the multi-layered perceptron came into picture. So what this multi-layer perceptron is? So can we stack, a number of these perceptrons to solve the non-linearly separable problems? So with that intention, the multi-layer perceptron was introduced. So here if you observe, the same old perceptron only. So all the processing that we have taken, we have seen in case of the perceptron, they are stacked together. So into layers. So here you can see this one layer of neurons, other layer of neurons. And at each layer again we have number of neurons, right? So we are almost stacking a set of perceptron together and they are connected together. And so can these multi-layer perceptron can be used to solve the non-linear problems? Yeah. So let's have a look at that. So what are the basic features of this multi-layer perceptrons is, so if you observe here, every neuron is having the processing capability and it includes the non-linear activation functions. So in case of the perceptron, you can simply use the threshold logic also, you can simply use a linear activation function also. But here all the activations except for in the final layer, so mostly you are using the non-linear activation functions. If at all, if you are using the non-linear activation functions, they should be differentiable in nature. So otherwise there is a problem. So such kind of activation functions you should use with each and every neuron in the network. And the network contains, of course, so one or more of the layers, hidden units and one output layer, right? So like that we are formulating the multi-layer perceptron. So of course a perceptron only, but you are making layers of such perceptrons. So that is why we call it as multi-layered perceptron. And what is the power of the representation power of these multi-layered perceptrons? So these multi-layered perceptron, even if you have a single layer, single hidden layer also. So here if you observe, this is the input data, okay, and this is the output layer, and this is the hidden layer. So even if you have one hidden layer, so you can represent any of the functions. So like if they are the Boolean functions, without any error, you can represent such functions. That is all the Boolean functions exactly you can represent with a single hidden layer neural network. And if it is a bounded continuous function, so you can represent such functions with some error, so which is an arbitrary epsilon error. So that is the representation power of this multi-layer perceptron neural networks. And this is proved with the universal approximation theorem. So like the power of the multi-layer perceptron neural networks. And how these neural networks can be trained. So like if you observe, so these are the weights, right? So here these are the weights, these are the weights. Then how we are going to train these neural networks? Of course, we have seen how to update the weights in case of the perceptron. But how do we update the weights in case of the multi-layered perceptron? So how do we train them? So let's have a look at that. So the training of the multi-layer perceptron involves 5 different steps. So what we do is, similar to your perceptron, we initialize all the weights and the with the random values. So consider, so these are the hidden layers. Here in this case I have two hidden layers, one output layer, and these are the input data example, right? And these are every input layer is connected to the hidden layer, every hidden neuron is connected to the next layer, and the last hidden layer is again connected to the output layer, right? So now you need to present the examples to your network. So that's the second step. And then you need to have the forward propagation of the inputs, and then you need to do the backward propagation of the error. So if you observe in the perceptron also, so you are presenting the example and then you are presenting to the perceptron, then you are getting the predicted value. Then depending on the error, so you are updating your weights, right? And how you should update your weights? So you have to update your weights such that the error is minimized. Over the iterations, the error has to be minimized such that you need to do it, right? So the final prediction computation is known as the forward computation, and after getting the prediction, so you need to again update the weights, right? So that computation is known as the backward propagation of the error. And this has to be, so these has to be done in an iterative manner. So as long as the network converges or the error is up to the satisfactory level. The training of the multi-layer perceptron happens in two different ways. So the forward phase and the backward phase. So in the forward phase, what happens is, so if it is the first step, then we initialize all the weights. So if it is the further steps, we use those weights and so compute the hidden neuron outputs, then the next hidden neuron outputs, and finally the output neuron values, right? So we get the final prediction values. Then we come, that's a forward propagation. So forward propagation, it's easy. But so in the backward propagation, what we need to do, so we have to compute the error. That means backward propagation means we are going to update the weights. So how do we update the weights? So we'll look at those details now. So now consider this visualization of the training of the MLP. So if you observe this network, so animation should come, yeah. So you can see the weights are initialized, then we are getting the neuron outputs, then at the next layer, then at the next layer. So once we get the outputs, again, we need to update the weights. So how we have to update these weights. So we should understand this complex process, right? Yeah. So before understanding that, we need to have an understanding of, so what the error is, so error surfaces, and what is the minimum in the error surfaces. So if you consider for a single neuron with single weight, so here you can observe, this is the weight parameter I'm talking about, this is W, and so this is the loss function we are considering. So then if you consider for the linear activation function, the linear neuron, so the error surface, the vertical cross section of the error surface looks like this. It looks like a simple parabola, right? So for different, if your weights are here, say for example here, if your weights are somewhere here, then so your error is this, right? And if your weights are somewhere here, then your loss is this. And ideally, what is the ideal weight here in this example? So here, if your weights are these weights, then so your loss is minimum, right? So, but how do we get to know which are the ideal weights of your model? So there is no mechanism to know that, right? So randomly we need to choose the parameters initially. Say for example, this is the starting point of your weights. You are somewhere here. Then, so ideally you need to get to these weights. The next iteration, the next iteration, the next iteration. Slowly we need to come to the level, reach to the weights which are giving the minimum error. So this is the ideal situation. But so how this happens? So how do we incrementally reduce the error when we update the weights? So of course this is a simple with the single minimum only, right? So the point where the error is minimum for the weights, so such value is known as a minima. But this is only one minima is available for the simple surface. But usually in the real scenarios you will be having the complex error surface. So if you observe this kind of complex error surface, you can see, and you can observe multiple minimas. So here this is the minima, this is the minima, this is the minima, and this is the minima, right? These are the minimas. So multiple minimas. But the ideal minima is a global minima. So the global minima is the one which gives you the, the minimum loss possible. The minimum possible loss is given by this global minimum. But the problem here is, so when your weights, your random weights are somewhere here, then you can slowly incrementally come down and reach this position. But you cannot reach this global position, global minima. So that is the problem with the random initialization. So maybe we'll come back to that later, maybe in further sessions that will be in detail explained. But let's see how we update the parameters incrementally such that our error is minimized in each iteration. So, and if you look at here, I have shown for a single weight, right? Single weight parameter. But if you have more weight parameters, so of course I cannot visualize it when more weight parameters are taken. So that's how I have taken only 2 weight parameters. Here in this 3D picture, you can see the weight 1 and weight 2. So when there are 2 different weights, then your error surface something looks like this, right? So you can see how complex the error surface is. And you can observe this is the local minima, this is the local minima and local minima, right? Yeah. So now here you can observe this is the global minima. So this is where the error is the minimum. So this is the position we need to reach. And how do we arrive at those minimum levels? So for that, we need to understand in which direction we need to move in the error surface. So that we need to understand. So consider this error surface. So here this is the weight parameter and this is the error surface and this is the loss axis, right? And now once you are here, so assume, so you are somewhere here in the weight initialization step. Now when you are here, so you need to, ideally you need to move close to your global minima, right? So say for example, you are moving in the next iteration to this level of weights. Then, so what is the change in weights? So when you increase your weight parameters, right? So here, these are the weights. When you increase your weight, then your gradient, your loss is reduced, right? And in this direction, if you observe, when you are on the error surface, now if you assume that these are the initial weights, then you need to move towards this weight to reach your global minima in the next further iterations, right? And you are kind of reducing your weight parameters. You are reducing, right? So reducing the weights. When you reduce your weights, your loss is reducing here. So always you should move in the direction so which reduces your loss. And in which direction we need to move such that the error is minimized. So here if you observe, the slope of this line is the negative slope, right? And when you are at this position, the slope of this line is a positive slope, right? And here you need to, if you observe, to reach this global minima, you need to, move in the opposite direction of your slope. When you move in the opposite direction of the slope, then you can reach you are guaranteed to reach this minima value, right? So in this, here in this, the slope is negative. So because it's no more a line, it's a curve, right? It's a surface. So that is how, instead of taking the slope, what we consider is the gradient of the surface. So we take the gradient of the surface and we move in the direction of the negative direction of the gradient of the error surface. So with this, we update the weights. The weight update rule that we have discussed earlier, so is updated with this. So Wi is now become Wi minus alpha. So alpha is the learning rate, of course. Alpha into the gradient of the error with respect to Wi. The parameter W is updated in the ith iteration such that in the negative direction of the gradient of the error. So any doubts on this? Yeah. So that is how, if we can move in the negative direction of the errors, then it is guaranteed to reach the minimum error loss. So that is what the take away from this, right? And we have a beautiful approach called gradient descent approach. So which allows you to reach the minimum in the loss. So this gradient descent basically allows us to minimize the loss or the objective function. So basically the error function in this case. And it provides a systematic approach to update the weights in the neural network. That's what the gradient descent approach is. And in every iteration, it guarantees the reduction in the loss value. And one more thing is, so instead of taking, you cannot try out every value in your W, because the W can take any value from positive infinity to negative infinity, right? You cannot try out every value of W. So in that case, what you need to do is, so with the minimum number of iterations itself, you should reach the minimum value in the loss, right? And what allows you to do that is the gradient descent approach. So the gradient descent approach, if you follow, that means your gradient descent approach, what it tells you. So it tells you what you update your weights in the negative direction of the gradient of the error. Then it guarantees to reach your minima with fewer iterations. So that's what the gradient descent approach is. And with this gradient approach in the mind, so we'll have a look at the training of the MLP again. So you're forward propagating of the inputs. Then so you need to backward propagate your errors, right? Of course, forward propagation, it's pretty simple. So like you are multiplying your inputs with the weight parameters, getting the neuron aggregation value, then apply the activation, then get the output from this neuron, and similarly these neurons are connected to the other neurons, so on and so forth. So finally we can get the predicted value. So that is how the forward propagation works. But how the backward propagation of the errors happen? So for that we have an algorithm, and the important algorithm in the neural network context, so that is the backward propagation algorithm. So this is the algorithm which allows you to update the weights using the gradient descent method. So gradient descent only tells you have to update your weights according to your negative direction of your gradient. And using this gradient descent, you can update your weights in the network. And how do we update using the back propagation? So we'll have a look at that using some example. So consider this example. So I have the input layer, the input values I1 and I2, and now I have a hidden layer with 2 neurons, and this is the output neuron. So only single neuron I'm taking, and every neuron, it's a fully connected layer, fully connected network, right? So that is how every input is connected to the hidden neurons, and every hidden neuron is also connected to the output neuron. So that is how altogether I have W1, W2, W3, W4. So weights at the input layer to the hidden layer, and from the hidden layer to the output, so we have W5 and W6. And how do we get this output value? So if you observe, so we get this output value, that is a prediction value. I better use some other color. Yeah. So how do we get this output value is, this output is equal to, this G1, G2 that I'm using here are the activation functions, basically the nonlinear activation functions. So the activation function I'm using is applied on the here, okay. So here there is an activation function G1. So this G1 is applied on this. What is this value? So it's W5 multiplied with H1 plus W6 multiplied with H2. Right? And how this H1 and H2, we get this H1 and H2. So H1 we get it by multiplying, this is like weighted sum of W1 I1 plus W2 I2 plus that is how we get this H1. On top of that, we need to apply again, remember, the nonlinear activation. So the G2 here, right? And similarly, we get the H2 value also. So what is H2 here? So H2 is the nonlinear activation function on top of the weighted average of, so W3 I1 plus W4 I2, right? So that's how we get the predicted value. So once we get this predicted value, this prediction value, so then if you observe, so once we get the prediction value, that is the out value, if we are not happy with the prediction value, then we need to update, right? Update the network such that we get the correct prediction values. Then what can be updated in your network? So can you see here, what are the values that can be updated in this equation? So here if you observe I1, I2 are the inputs, right? So I1, I2s cannot be changed. So the multiplication plus symbols that cannot be changed, of course. So here, if you observe, no, the W1, of course, the nonlinear functions, they also cannot be changed. What we can update to reduce the error is the weight values in the network. W1, W2, W3, W4, W5, W6. So those are the weight values that can be changed to minimize the error in the network. So how we update those values, that we need to understand. So using the gradient descent approach, we can update the values. So let's have a look at this, how we update them. So assume the inputs are 2, 3, then the output, that is the class label of this input sample is a positive class. That's 1, right? And we assume that we are initializing all the weights with these random values. So then we need to compute the hidden layer values first, right? So how do we get this value? So this into this plus this into this, like 3.21. So then on top of this 0.85 again, I assume that I'm only using, for simplicity, I'm assuming that there is no nonlinear activation, only the linear activation, just for the illustration purpose, remember. So now I have got 0.85 and 0.48 as the hidden neuron output values. Then, so this out value has to be computed. How do I compute? So this into this plus this into this. Then I get the output value. And of course, I am using the linear activation. So the same value is the prediction value. So now what is the prediction value here? 0.191 is the prediction value. But what is your actual ground truth? It's 1. So what is the difference between this value and this? Right? So I am not happy with this predicted value. Then what I need to do, I need to update my weight values to get a different prediction value. Right? For that, what you need to do? So you need to update your weight values in the negative direction of the gradient of the error, right? So what is the error here? So the error value here is, I am taking for the simplicity, the mean squared error, okay? So of course, because single example is only the squared error I am taking, okay? So the predicted value minus the actual ground truth value whole square, and the half is used only for the calculation, comfortability, that's all. So here the error is computed, the error for this example, it is 0.3. So 0.3 is the error I'm getting from this example by inputting that example. Then how do we update the weights to get the better value? So let's see. So just for the simplicity, I'm calling this output value as a prediction value, and the prediction value in terms of the H1 and H2 you can write. So instead of the out, I can write it as H1 W5 plus H2 W6, and similarly the H1 H2 also. And final prediction value, if you observe, I1 W1 plus I2 W2 into W5, so on and so forth. So this is the final prediction value. But to get a different prediction value, you need to update the W1, W2, W3, W4 and W5, W6, right? And how do we update them? So we understand from the gradient descent, we understand that. So if you can update the weights in the negative direction of the gradient of the error surface, then that makes me closer to the error surface. Right? So with that in mind, I am trying to update this W6. So remember, when you are using the, so when we are updating the weights in the network, so we always need to update the weights at the final layer. That is the neurons that are, or the weights that are connecting the last hidden layer to the output layer. Those neuron values you need to first update. Okay, so with that intention in mind, so I am explaining how do we update the W6. So here W6 is updated with W6 minus this is the learning parameter, okay, and then the gradient of the error. How do we get the gradient of the error? So by taking the partial derivative with respect to W6, because there are multiple parameters involved. So I apply the derivative, that to partial derivative with respect to the W6, right? And if you observe, what is the error? Error is basically half into prediction minus actual, right? So there is no W6 parameter in your error. So then we need to apply the chain rule and apply the partial derivative, right? So the partial derivative on the error. So with respect to the prediction, then with respect then partial derivative on the prediction with respect to W6. So if you observe, if you observe the prediction, so what is the prediction value? So this is what the prediction value. right? Just substitute it here. So what is the error? So error is actually this equation. So this error and this prediction equations, they are substituted, just plugging those values. So then you apply the derivative. So if you apply the derivative on this, so we get half into, so this 2 into this value, right? So 2 into prediction minus actual. So that is how we apply the derivatives. Then we apply, if you apply on this, the derivative on this, then we get here. So again, we need to apply the derivative here, right? So then we get one value here, right? So the actual is not related to the prediction. So the prediction value, with respect to the prediction, we are taking the derivative. So we get a one value here, right? So for this first term, so what is the derivative we are getting is this, right? And what about this part? So for this part, so here, from here we are coming, right? So here, if you apply with respect to W6, so this entire term, so will be insignificant because there is no W6, but here we have a W6 term, so we get I1 W3 plus I2 W4, right? So this is the value we get from the second term. With respect to W6, we are taking the derivative. And if you closely observe, this value is nothing but your H2, if you remember, right? So now, when you apply the partial derivative on the error with respect to W6, so you can, it all boils down to the prediction minus actual. So you can consider this as the delta value, the prediction minus actual. We have the prediction value, we have the actual value, and we also have the H2 value, right? From the inputs itself we got. And so with this value, you need to plug in this equation to update your W6. So your old W6 is subtracted with the this gradient of the error with respect to W6, that is this delta H2. And this is the learning parameter, which is a constant again. And this is the new updated weight for W6. So that is how you need to update your weights in the network. Of course, at the final layer, we are updating. Now, how do we go back and update this? Similarly, the same kind of equation you can observe for W5 also. Then when we update the weights at the first layer, how to do the previous layers, right? So now we updated the values with W5 and W6. Now, what about the previous layer? So how do we update that? So let's have a look at that now. So now W1, the same old equation, the gradient descent approach we are following, right? So updated W1 equal to W1 minus the learning parameter into the grade, like the partial derivative on the error surface with respect to W1, because we are going to update W1, right? So because the error, if you observe the error equation, so it's not involved with the W1 directly. So we use the chain rule, okay? And by applying the chain rule, so it turns out to be like this. So then we apply and, apply with respect to H1, with respect to W1. So if you observe, finally, so we get for the first term, so we get this value. So here you can observe. And for the second term, so here with respect to H1, when we apply, so this will be H5 and all other terms will get cancelled. And with respect to W1, if we do, it is I1. So finally we get W5 I1, right? So what is this W5 I1? So this is the W5 is the connection between this neuron and the output neuron, right? So when you want to update your W1, so it's equal to your prediction value minus actual into, so the neuron output, that is the W5 into I1. So where is W5? Yeah. So this is W5 and this is multiplied with I1. So if you update using this equation, then you are reaching your minimum. So that is how you need to update. Similarly, you can get the update equations for W2, W3 and W4 also. So layer by layer, you need to update your weights. If you have further layers, no, so here in this example, we have only 2 layers. But if you have one more layer, then again back to the previous layer and update. Okay, so the weights that you are updating in the later layers will become as inputs to your while updating your weights to the close to the input layers. So here if you observe, when you are updating W1, so W5 is required. That is W5 updated weight is required. Yeah. So that is how the weights are updated when you are using the backpropagation algorithm. So here you can see how we are updating, W1 to W6, all the weights. So it's, after all, we are doing the matrix multiplication. Just to get the idea of it, I have written the equations. So the learning parameter, what is this learning parameter? So the learning parameter is basically the hyperparameter. So, you know, you need to provide it manually. So before the training starts itself. And you need to be very careful when you are applying this learning parameter. So, you know, if your weights are somewhere here, and if you are giving a large, large learning rate, then what happens is your weights might go somewhere here, skipping your global minima. Right? So that's the problem. So you need to be very careful. When it is too small, what happens is it takes too many number of iterations to reach the final minima. So that is how you should be very careful when you are setting your learning rate parameter in your neural network. So then coming to the hyperparameters, what are the hyperparameters that are in the context of the deep neural networks? So in every machine learning algorithm, you will be having certain hyperparameters. The parameters which you are setting prior to the learning happens. And these are the parameters which will not be updated during the learning process. They are known as the hyperparameters. So what are these hyperparameters? I think. Yeah, the activation functions you are going to decide, and whether you need to do this kind of training, whatever we have updated the weights, So those updation of weights can be done in different ways. So one is a batch learning, the other one is the online learning, and the other one is a mini batch learning. So in the context of the deep neural networks, we'll be using the mini batch learning. So what this batch learning is, so when you are updating your weights, you are feeding in all the examples from your data set, and then you are updating your weights. So you are taking the error for your entire set of examples in your data set, and then you are considering that error, and then you are updating your weights. So that's what the batch learning is. And the online learning means for every example you are feeding into the network, you are updating, you are calculating the error, and you are updating the weights. So that's what the online learning is. For every example. The problem is that the online learning, so your learning will become very, very slow. But with the case of the batch learning, what happens is your network will be too biased with the, the final set of examples you are passing for the training. So that's what the limitation with the batch learning and the online learnings are. So then you can consider the mini batch, where your entire data set, is split into number of mini batches. Say for example, 32 examples or 100 examples or 200 or whatever. So the typical sizes would be 32, 64, 128, so on and so forth. So, with that mini batch, we feed those many number of samples to the network. Then we compute the error at the output layer, and we, update the weights according to the error we calculated for those 32 examples. So now the number of updations that are happening is minimized when compared to the online learning, and are larger when compared to the batch learning. So in between the batch and the online learning, you can use a mini batch learning. Yeah, the activation functions you need to decide. So these are all the hyperparameters. At which layer, what kind of activation function you need to decide. I hope all these details will be in detail discussed in the tomorrow's lecture. So we have the hyperparameter tuning session. So in that session, it will be in detail discussed. So I'll just give you some hints. Yeah, and you need to decide how many layers are there and how many, like here in this case, if you assume this is the input layer, so 2 hidden neurons and 1 output neuron. Then you can even use more number of layers also. And how many neurons at each layer? How do you decide that? And when you are doing the classification task, and if it is multi-class classification, then the output neurons must be equal to the number of classes in your data set. Say for example here, 4 neurons, right? So if it is a multi-class classification, then it should be 4 classes. So then you can use 4 different neurons at the output layer. So if it is a binary, then there are 2 ways. So one is you can use a single neuron and you can use a sigmoid activation function, or otherwise two neurons and use a softmax activation. So that is how you need to decide on the number of neurons you are using at each neuron, each layer. And also always when we have multiple layers, so we follow the structure of increasing the number of neurons up to a certain level and again decreasing the number of neurons from there on to reach the final layer. So that is a, that gives you a better result when you are implementing a deeper neural network. So that's about the number of layers and the number of neurons. So when you have the deep neural network in hand, you will be having the too many number of layers, right? So a large number of hidden layers you can see in case of the deep neural network. So with the availability of the data, with the computational resources altogether, the size of the neural network you are implementing, the depth of the neural network has grown significantly, right? And what these deep neural networks are learning at each layer is, if you observe, so if you are passing, say for example, this person's image, then at the initial layer, which is close to the, don't assume that there are only 3 neurons and 3 layers. So I'm talking about a bigger, I'm assuming that there is a bigger neural network with deeper number of layers, like large number of layers. Then the neurons, the layers at the close to the input layer, so they are kind of capturing the very basic details from the input images. Say for example, lines or edges or the color features, so on and so forth. So and they can extract multiple such features. And so the neurons at the hidden, so for every specific feature in the input, then what is the pattern? So those patterns will be captured at the hidden layers that are exactly at the middle of the neural network. And when you go deeper and close to the output layer, so they will be able to extract the holistic feature of the input image, and these features are very, very critical for the classification or for the task in hand. So such representations will be captured by the later layers of your deep neural network. And what is the difference between the multi-layer perceptron and deep neural network? So if someone asks me, so I would say, so of course, the stacking of the neurons and all is the same, but the size of the data sets we have at that time during the 1980s was very, very limited, and the computational power was very limited. But what we have is the GPUs and TPUs in hand. You can pass in millions of the data and you can present that to your network, so that you can make the number of layers in your network, deeper, and you can make your neural network learn better representations. So as deeper your network is, the more hierarchical representations the neural network can learn the representations. And the weight initializations we have done at that point in time when we use the MLP is the most stupidest way we did. But now with the deep neural network architectures, we have, beautiful way of initializing the weights, and the non-linearity functions are also. So I have just shown what are the different non-linearities, right? So these are only the olden days used non-linearities, but nowadays, if you observe, so these kind of advanced activation functions you can use, which gives you the better non-linearity in your data. So if you want to represent more complex data, the data, then you need to go for the complex non-linearity, right? So the ReLU activation function. So even the advancements in the ReLU, like leaky ReLU, the exponential linear unit. So these are all the the modern activation functions, they contributed for the success of the deep neural networks. So these all together form the deep neural network architectures. And of course the loss functions. Coming to the loss functions, you need to use, when to use which kind of loss function. When you are using the, the regression task, maybe you can use the squared loss, this like mean squared error loss you can use. And when you are using the classification task, then you can use the cross entropy. When you have only 2 classes, then you can use the binary cross entropy. When you have multiple classes, then you can use a categorical cross entropy. And when you are representing your labels with one hot encoders, then you need to go for the sparse categorical cross entropy loss. So these are briefly about the loss functions you can use. Maybe I would give you some of the tips in choosing the loss functions. So when you are using the regression task, then, so you know that your output value is a numerical value, of course, and the predicted value, like the prediction you are expecting from your model, can take any of the value, right?
So then in that case, your final layer activation function must be of linear type. And the loss function, the appropriate loss function is a mean squared error loss function you can use. And similarly, if it is a classification, and in that classification task, depending on the type of classification you are doing, so I'm only talking about the final layer activation function because that matters a lot. So in between, maybe you can use Redu, Sigmoid or Tanish or whatever, depending on the application you are doing. But at the final activation function, when it is a classification task, then if it is a binary, then you can go for the sigmoid. And if it is a multi-class classification, so then you need to use a softmax. Okay. And the loss function you need to use is cross entropy in case of the multi-class classification. And if it is a binary classification, the binary cross entropy. And if your task is, the multi-class classification with multiple labels. Of course, there are multiple classes, and so if every example can be belonging to more than one class also. That's what multi-class classification, multi-label classification, sorry. So if your task is multi-label and multi-class, then in that case, you need to go for the sigmoid activation function. So with a binary cross entropy loss function. So this is briefly about the choosing of activation functions and the loss functions and the optimization algorithms that we can use. I just have discussed about the gradient descent algorithm, right? So probably in some other session. So these like in detail, these algorithms will be discussed hopefully. The stochastic gradient descent, the momentum gradient descent, then Nestrov ADA gradient descent, then ADA grad, then ADA delta, RMS prop, ADAM. So these are the advancements of the optimization algorithms. So deep neural network, it doesn't mean that you just have more number of layers and more number of neurons. It's all about the optimization algorithms you are using, the loss functions, the activation functions you are using. So all together, these made the deep neural networks very successful for the real world applications that you need to observe. And if you typically look at various neural network architectures, so maybe there's a simple perceptron that's what we discussed. Then this is the feed forward neural network where the connections are only in the forward direction. This is a radial basis network, so which uses the radial basis functions in the network. Then the deep feed forward. So instead of simple, single layer, you can have more number of layers also. And then the recurrent neural networks where backward connections also. So when you have the backward connections, you can call them as a recurrent neural networks. And in the recurrent neural networks, you have a variation of that, the LSTM networks, which avoids the vanishing gradient problem that occurs in case of the RNN networks. Then the gated recurrent neural networks, which is also a kind of recurrent neural network. So these three networks, RNN, LSTM, GRU, these are used for representing the data which is having sequence. To represent sequential data, we can use these three kind of networks. Then if you want to go for the unsupervised learning, then you can use the autoencoder kind of networks. So the autoencoder, simple autoencoders where the input and the output are the same. So you are designing the model such that the input you are producing at the input layer is reproduced at the output layer. So that's what the autoencoder is. And the variational autoencoder where the class labels also comes into the picture when you are designing the autoencoder. And if you pass the input with some noise in hand, then with adding some noise to the input, then such an autoencoder is known as a denoising autoencoder. And the sparse autoencoder is again a variation of the autoencoder. So when you want to use the unsupervised learning, then you can implement any of the autoencoder variations. Then you have, graphical representations of the networks, the Markov chain, the half-field network, the Boltzmann machine, then the restricted Boltzmann, then deep belief network. So these are the graphical representations of the neural network models. The neural network models, which are basically used to represent the graphical format of the data. So then you have the deep convolutional neural networks, the most successful neural networks for the computer vision tasks, which are very good at representing the input data with hierarchical representations. So then we have the deconvolution. So in the convolution, so you are reducing the size of the input and you are capturing the representations. When you want to do the reverse of it, then you can go for the deconvolution. Then you can use the, even the convolution neural network also can be trained similar to your autoencoder. Maybe you can call it as deep convolutional autoencoder. Then the generative adversarial network, so which is again another a model for the generative, so a generative deep generative neural network model. Then the liquid state machines, the extreme learning machines, so the echo state machines. So these are all the variations of the neural network architectures that are available, and I hope in the further sessions, so variations of all these neural networks will be discussed in detail, so from different application perspectives.